Hello. So this session is the second in the University of Salford's Writing in Lockdown series, which is designed to help us stay in touch with our students over the summer break and also inspire you with some of our favourite writers. You'll also note this week that you should receive an invitation to our creativity showcase from David Saville. So that will let you know about some of the upcoming events that we have planned to celebrate our class of 2020. I've unfortunately missed out on some of those end of semester milestones. But for today, we will be speaking to one of my favourite writers, Seán Hewitt. I originally met Seán as an academic. I knew his work on the Irish sort of playwright and writer James Singh. And then it wasn't until an event in County Armagh several years ago that I saw Seán read his poetry the first time, and I was just really, really stunned by his work. That was originally started as a pamphlet from the Lifeboat, and then eventually worked his way up to the full-length collection Tongues of Fire. And to say this collection has been met with rapturous acclaim would be to put it very mildly. In every newspaper, poetry magazine, attitude magazine, just everywhere this collection has been very rightfully lauded. It is sold out. At one stage it was only available as an ebook, so it's quite a remarkable collection, Tongues of Fire. I strongly recommend that you read it. It is a collection that is vulnerable and tender, and also I think reminds us of a lot of the things that we miss about the world before, the world that we're in now, especially nightclubs, travel, but also reminds us of those things that we still have access to, you know, the people we love, the great outdoors. It's a really distinctive collection, and I'm so glad that Seán is going to read for us today. So Seán's going to read for about sort of a little over 10 minutes. Then we'll talk a little bit about creativity and keeping a writing habit going in lockdown. So Seán, take it away.
Okay, I think I'm online, right? Hello, everyone. I'm going to wave, and if you can't see me, then someone shout out. So thanks very much, Caroline. It's really nice to be asked to do a reading. It's been very odd launching a book, especially a first book, and not to actually have met any readers.
Seán, you've paused on your screen. You've frozen. Do you maybe want to refresh your browser or something to see if I can get you in real life again?
Yes, I will.
Okay, let me see if we can see you again.
Okay, am I back?
You are, yes, you are. You're moving. You're in all dimensions.
Okay. Right, so I don't know how much you got of that. So I was just saying it was really nice to be asked to do this, especially by you, Caroline, who has been a great supporter of my work. And it's been odd launching a book in lockdown, especially a first collection, because I haven't actually got to meet anyone that's read the book, which is a really weird experience. My book launched at the end of April, so it was kind of slap bang in the middle of lockdown. But thankfully it's all gone really well, and I have physical copies now. As Caroline said, they kind of went missing for a while, and the post and the distribution and everything was just a nightmare, because it was sort of at that start period of lockdown when no one quite knew what was happening, and we weren't even sure for a while if books were still going to be able to get out into the world, because there was no bookshops open. There was talk of the distributors closing, even the warehouses. So it's all been a relief now that it's come out into the world. So I thought I'd read a couple of poems for you and then answer whatever questions you have. I gather that there's a split between creative writing students and literature students. So I'd be interested to talk to both of you, both sides of the debate. And yeah, so I thought I'd start off with a poem called Ghost, which is in 3 sections. It's 3 sonnets that make up one poem. Yeah, so Ghost. 1. Waking, close to morning, but still a shuttered metal dark in the room. A sound inside my dream. Only a whimper at first, then becoming human. A howl raised in the street outside, left unanswered, then raised again. In my boxers, shivering by the single-paned window, but seeing no one among the black shapes of the parked cars or hedges, I went out half-dressed, hands shaking, front door unlocked, then pushed open, and by the column of the porch, under a cone of orange light, a young man slumped, drunk, sobbing like his whole life was unfurling into sound. 2. And now I am reminded of one afternoon, home from school, my father digging out the root of a conifer in the garden. I saw him look up, suddenly alert, leave by the back gate into the alley behind the terraces, and return panicked with a boy in his arms. I recognized him about my age from school by his dreadlocks, his turquoise streak of hair, but now lolling under his own weight, his wrists draining over my father's mudded jeans and the patio tiles. I knew even then the rumors about him, thought as we wrapped and pinned torn sheets around his opened veins, how we might share, once the truth was out, a bond, an elective blood. 3. Nights later, I only half slept, expecting at any moment to hear someone again outside, as though time might be caught in a loop. The same boy walking the mapped route along the dark streets at the same hour to my door. Again I unshuttered the window, stood waiting to see him come, barefoot maybe, down the path. Each night, no sign, until I thought perhaps it was only me, or a dream of myself, asking nightly to be greeted at the threshold, allowed back into the cold room of my life. But then, in each of us, a wound must be made or given. There is always the soul waiting at the door of the body, asking to be let out. It's nice to be reading to some creative writing students because I know how hard it can be, especially when you're thinking of leaving university and wondering like what practical steps can you do in order to carry on writing and get your work out there. And I thought I'd read this poem today because the first job I had after leaving university, I didn't have any plan at all when I left university, and I basically spent a year or so messing around doing odd jobs, worked in Marks and Spencer's, sold Christmas trees for a bit. Then I went to South America for a while. And anyway, my first job, I got a job as an apprentice poet in residence at Ilkley Literature Festival. And they offered, I think it was something like £150 a week for that. And I thought, okay, good, right, that's decent. I can make do. I was living at home at the time, so I was kind of calculating like how many return train journeys to Ilkley could I get with that, and then I figured out that wouldn't leave me with much money out of my 150 quid. So I decided instead that I would camp on the moors outside Ilkley. And it was October, I should add, so it was very cold, not the wise decision. And it was only about a week and a half into the festival, I turned up at one of the main halls and I had my tent like on my back. And the festival director was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I just got my tent because I'm going home." And she was like, "There's a hotel room that we have for you down the in the town where I should have been staying the whole time." And then anyway, I ended up staying there the rest of the time, which had been empty and waiting for me, and it had a lovely jacuzzi bath and everything. So a lesson to always ask what actually you're being paid to do and what you're being offered. Anyway, I did get a poem out of it. I wrote a little like Moor diary when I was in my tent up freezing cold. So this poem is called Moor. It didn't come out as a poem, it came out as like a journal, and then I kind of made it into a poem years afterwards. So this poem is called Moor. Is childless, sulks, speaks rain and sudden light, is a mind, is sleepless, lies deep in its bed, is always moving about at night, speaks fog with its moss mouth, is turned to sea by the wind, is waves in the dark crashing, is suddenly still, is a trembling of light on the tent, is a shudder of guy ropes and a shadow passing, is kept awake by its conscience, is always waiting, sounds like breathing, sounds like it is carrying bodies at night when no one is watching, is a swallower of sound, wants every night to reach up and swallow the moon, swallow something, is a mouth, hides and is never caught, sits in the dark quietly and smiles as the farmer walks out again with his torch beam, calling and calling a name. The next poem comes with a little story too. Some of you will probably know Seamus Heaney's bog body poems in his collection North. And they're kind of controversial for the way that they look at the female body and kind of play over it and to think politically through those bodies. I live in Dublin now, and I was looking in the National Museum, and they have the bog bodies out, and they're really strange to be in the presence of, really. They're in different states. This one, Old Crockham Man, is only a torso and arms, and his hands are left. And I read in the notes to the exhibition that he has his nipples are cut off, and they were trying to figure out why that was. He's really tall. He was 6'5", and wealthy, they think, because they did an analysis of what was in his stomach, which was rich foods that normal people wouldn't have been able to afford or had access to. So this poem is a poem about him. It's called Old Crockham Man, and it comes with an epigraph. Their nipples were cut, thus rendering them ineligible for kingship. The suckling of a king's nipples was an important gesture of submission. Only a torso now, the head long severed from the neck, pelvis twisted off like a stubborn root. Remember the worn jacket of his body pressed in the bog. Above, the galaxies of cotton grass turned inside out, like little souls among the eyebrights, the stitchwork. No place to leave a man alone. And under each nipple, a deep incision, blade width. Even then, they needed boys like me to leave power in our wake, to dip our heads and take to the soft pink mound. I would have felt then the making of a king, known God through my lips, entering the body. And I think I'll just read one last poem. It's called Ilex, which is just the Latin name for a holly tree. I had to give this one a little epigraph because it happened a few times that I sent it out, and people thought that it was by a woman, which is no bad thing. But then I turned up and they were confused by the poem. And then my editor asked me if I had a child, and I was like, no, I don't have a child. So anyway, it's Ilex, after the birth of my nephew. Distracting myself, waiting for news. I walked until I saw this white cluster of holly growing at the base of a tree. The stems yellowed, the angled clutch of leaves like a bleached coral, a pale antler, almost medieval, like a relic unearthing in the gloom of the wood. Later, still the baby would not latch, and I came back to this holly, unhardened by the sun, unable to turn the light into strength. May it keep its whiteness. May it never learn the use of thanks. Or, in time, when a crown is made of it, may the people approach one by one to witness how a fragile thing is raised. Thank you. Caroline, come back.
Oh, that was really, really wonderful. So you can just imagine rapturous applause in your mind,
I always do. Yeah.
People standing there with a lukewarm glass of white wine and ready to sing your praises. So it was really, really, really fantastic reading. How have you been getting on writing the last few months since we've been in lockdown? So you're originally from the northwest of England, but you're currently locking down in Dublin.
Yeah, that's right.
And how have you been getting on with sort of writing, creativity? I'll not use the word productivity because that's a horrible word, but how have you been getting on?
Well, I think I've had a bit of a double whammy of it because, like I said, the book came out during the lockdown too. So I was not only stuck with the difficulty of writing in lockdown, but also stuck with the difficulty of writing after you've just published a book, which is a weird thing to begin with because I was very conscious of not wanting to write new poems that kind of belonged in the old book, like I didn't want to just repeat myself. So I was thinking through that, and then also just dealing with the fact that my attention span, despite the fact that we have nothing to do, has completely shot. So I decided to kind of give myself a break after a while, and instead what I've been doing is writing down lines and ideas for poems and sort of stashing them away. And writing half poems or ones that I know aren't finished and then just leaving them. And I hope that at some point I will be able to come back and finish them. But it seems like I can write notes towards a poem and I can have ideas of what might be a poem, but my knack for finishing it is really shot. So I've managed probably like 3 or 4 in the last 4 months or something like that, which is actually not that bad going for me. I'm a slow writer anyway. But yeah, I'm hoping that once I get out and about in the world and have a few distractions, I might be able to finish them up. Yeah.
And you've also come to the end of a big academic project with your book on JM Singh as well. So have you managed to write academically in lockdown either, or?
Yeah, I have actually. The academic work has been much easier. I mean, I suppose the thing that happens with books as well is that you publish them and everyone kind of assumes that you just wrote it. But the
Yeah.
fact is, I finished that Singh book like 2.5 years ago, and it's not due out until January 2021.
Yeah.
So I almost don't really remember what's in it anymore. So I'm way into the new project. I probably I've just sent out a proposal for that book now actually. So I'm I'm way into that, and I actually find it a much easier thing to focus on academic writing than creative writing at this time. I don't know why that is.
And how do you usually sort of manage the two sort of modes of writing? Do you sort of switch between the two in one day and 1 week? Like, how do you sort of shift between the two sort of headspaces?
I'm not a very organized poet. Not that I mean, those things are not usually going together anyway. But I know some people that will, get up at 6 in the morning, write for 3 hours every day, even if it's rubbish, and then carry on. I tend to just write in spare bits of time. So sometimes I'll be midway through an academic thing and just drop it and open a new document because I can feel a poem coming on, or I just get an idea and I run with it. And I'm lucky enough that being on a postdoc now, so I'm just paid I have research funding to just write my academic work. No one's quite really watching what I'm doing with my hours, so I can drop an hour here, an hour there, and do creative writing in those spare moments. I actually find the two things go quite well together in my case, because I don't think I could draw a direct line of inspiration between the academic work and the poetry, but I'm sure that spending so much time reading fires my imagination for what I might write as well. So the two do work in tandem like that.
Great. And as you mentioned, you've obviously you've one book just out, one book of poetry just out, and then another kind of critical book on the way. I'm wondering if you could just talk to the experience, because I know that before this, in the before times, that you were quite sort of active and supportive of first of all the poetry scene in Liverpool when you were there, and then in Dublin whenever you moved there as well. What has it been like to launch a book at this time? What has it felt like? What sort of events have you done around it?
To be honest, I was really apprehensive. I did a very woe is me response to lockdown because I knew that my book was coming, and I was like, this is a personal attack on my book. Like, why is it me that's launching a book at the exact time of a global pandemic? But actually, I found it really, like, there's been a lot of camaraderie between the poets and everyone wanting to make sure that things didn't drop through the net. So I've done some podcasts. I did a a Facebook launch. So my publisher, Jonathan Cape, is part of Vintage, and they did a Facebook reading. I did a Facebook reading to launch the book, and actually that ended up probably being better than doing a physical launch, because I was going to do it in Gaze the Word in London, which is a bookshop that you could probably fit 80 people in. And then when you broadcast it on Facebook Live, suddenly it had over 1,000 views. So it kind of worked out like that. And I think that that's one thing that we'll have to learn the lesson of, is that all of these digital ways of getting poetry out into the world are so much more accessible, and people want to watch poetry and listen to it, but it's just a case of either they can't afford to, or they live in places where they wouldn't have access to some of those events because they tend to happen in cities, or they're not disability, that like the access needs are not there. So it's been really helpful in that. So podcasts and Zoom readings and Instagram Live and all of this sort of stuff that I never had thought of before. We've done that. And then myself and a couple of poets in Ireland set up a podcast as well, called Unlaunched Books, where we kind of invited poets who hadn't launched their books or were due to launch their books during lockdown, so didn't have a launch reading. We invited them onto the podcast to do readings and interviews and stuff like that, so we could kind of ensure that they were still getting out into the world. So yeah.
Yeah, and that podcast Unlaunched, it's available on most of the major. Is it just on SoundCloud? Is it available that people can listen to?
No, I think you should be able to get it on.
Get it on
all the other things as well. Yeah, but if you Google it, it's the website is I think just unlaunchedbooks.com or something like that. So we did 8 episodes, and then we're returning with 3 new episodes in July, August. So we've commissioned some new work, and then we're also having a guest curator come in and do one of the episodes as well. So yeah.
Fantastic. So by now you have a lot of experience with reading yourself and also kind of organizing some readings. Are there any tips you might give to any sort of our emerging poets who are about to do their first online reading?
If you're about to do an online reading, yeah, I would say one good thing is to turn it off so you can't see yourself reading. It's quite nice not to be able to look at your face. Oh God, what are my tips? No, I don't know. I mean, just everyone's probably a lot more au fait with this now, with reading and speaking on Zoom and things like that. No, hold up your poetry. Make sure repeat things a few times so people know where to go and find out more about you. Repeat your Twitter handle and stuff like that, because you won't have the follow-up conversations that you have at a normal event where you get to go around and then people will ask you questions and follow up. So point people in the direction of the places where you'll give them more information, so Twitter or a website or whatever else it is. And yeah, don't be afraid of like collaborating between yourselves and setting up your own readings, because they're really easy to set up. People will help, and there's good guidelines as well online for how not to get Zoom bombed, whatever else. Have a look at those first as well.
Yeah, and I think we've been looking at sort of different platforms that work with external speakers, and how you make things asynchronous versus synchronous, because I know that the event that you did, the Facebook launch, you had recorded that and then uploaded it at a specific time, so it sort of had elements of both, and I think it worked really, really, really well, that launch.
Yeah, I think that was really handy, especially if you can pre-record something. It takes a lot of the nerves off doing it, because you're not actually doing it full time, and also you just, I mean, like me freezing on the screen and having to come back in again, you don't have any of that worry. I found that Instagram Live is a really difficult one to get right, because you have to use your phone, you can't use the desktop app, and the way, I don't know how big people's phone screens are, but mine, like people's comments kind of take up the bottom half of the screen, and then you can't see yourself, and then people are dropping in and out, and it's kind of stressful. Something like this that you can use on a desktop is much easier if you have access to it.
Yeah, and I think it's such a learning curve for us all, because we've obviously done a few Irish Studies events online, and I've watched a lot of stuff online, because as you say, like whether it's for issues of accessibility, caring, responsibilities, whatever, or just cost as well, or just not wanting to go to London to see everything. I think for me it's been great. There's been lots of talks. Like we were obviously, I think you were in on the launch of Claire Connolly's Cambridge book of Irish fiction, and it's been really great to kind of dip in and dip out of stuff. But I think obviously there's a lot of stuff that doesn't happen, as you say, the conversations afterwards, people coming to have a little word, and as you say, it's hard to get substitutes for these things.
Yeah, it's really hard, especially because you can't really map those I suppose like you and I met at a conference, found common interests just through chats or at the pub or whatever, and then you form a relationship and you can work together and make friends. And poetry and creative writing really does rely on those networks, because it's all about making friends with the same interests or learning about things, and yeah, finding support groups and things like that. And that can be really hard to do just on a on Zoom. But I think you can kind of make up for it on Twitter in a way, following poets that you like and responding to them and getting chatting and posting your work online. That can be a good way of getting known. But yeah, it's hard to substitute directly.
Yeah, and I think with some of my academic collaborators that I've met through social media, the thing has been to build up that sort of initial rapport, and then to try to make it in person as quickly as possible. Because obviously you'll meet a lot more people online than you would either in your own institution, in your own scene. So I think it's good to think about ways whenever we're all allowed out again to meet up safely. I'm wondering if I could ask you just finally about just who you're reading at the moment, and are there any poets that you'd recommend that maybe some of our sort of budding literary critics and creative writers might take a look at?
Yeah, well, with all that's been going on in the world, I've been looking back at my bookshelf, and trying to, I suppose I've been noticing gaps in things that I haven't been reading and things that I should be reading, and also books that have new relevance for me as well. So I've been reading, I just got up a pile of them. This book here is really good. It's Terence Hayes' American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. And he wrote a sonnet a day for something like the first 300 days of the Trump presidency. And then he's cut them down. There's maybe like 130 of them. But that's a really interesting book to read, because it's almost like a documentary response of things that are going on. And there's a sense as well that the poems don't have to be perfect as you're going through, because you're reading them in a different way. And that's a really interesting book. It's really formally exciting too. And it's really on the pulse of things that are going on. There's also, if you've seen the MMU, have got that Right Where We Are Now thing, which is they've kind of commissioned poets to write poems on dated poems in locations responding to lockdown and coronavirus pandemic. So those two things kind of work together if you read these sonnets as kind of daily journalistic meditations on the world where we are now. So that's Terence Hayes' American Sonnets. I've also gone back to one of my favorite poets, Tracy K Smith. I don't know if you know her. She's an American poet. She's published by Penguin in the UK, so the books are really easily available, which is sometimes difficult with some of the American books that don't have UK or Irish publishers. And then another one that I've been reading, which has been my own personal discovery, and I don't know anyone else that reads her, so I'm hoping that to spread the word, is Jane Mead. She's an American poet. She died last year, I think. And they are amazingly vulnerable, pared down poems. So this is actually one long poem. It's called World of Made and Unmade, which is an elegy for her mother. I'd really recommend that, especially for, I'll try and find you some examples, but it's kind of a little bit like Claudia Rankine's Citizen in that it uses multimedia stuff and images, and so in some cases it has like music or different scraps of stuff that she puts into the book as well. So I found those like really interesting because they're not really the sort of poetry that I write. But when you're starting off with a new book as well, it's kind of good to see different ways that people do stuff and how can you jolt yourself into a new direction. But yeah, I found those books really interesting. I suppose like a lot of us, I'm thinking about my position in the world and how what I'm writing can respond to it, and should it respond in certain ways, or like questioning my own position within the poetry world, and what poetry needs to be, and whether I'm able to respond in certain ways, or whether I should not respond in certain ways, and whether it should be amplifying other people. And I suppose I've just been sitting with that discomfort for a couple of weeks now, and I haven't really come to a conclusion on the best way to go forward. But I think that it's probably, it will inevitably have to change the way that I think about writing, and the way that I think about lyric poetry as well, because it's all, well, it comes from the self, like I don't write political poems. I don't really write poems like Terence Hayes responding directly to world events. So all of those things have made me think in new ways about what poetry should do, or what its function is, and whether it's okay to have different sorts of poetry that don't respond, so long as you're uplifting poetry that does respond in certain ways. And don't know, it's a question I'm mulling over.
I think it's a question that we're all grappling with and thinking about at the moment, and I think really I'm having a real reckoning with the sort of the systems that we participate in, and as you say, like taking the time to educate ourselves rather than expecting anyone else to do that work, especially people who are normally sort of charged with doing that work, is the right thing. I think, as you say, it has to be considered. It really has to be thoughtful and undoing a lot of the structures that we all sort of deal with day to day. So here endeth this portion of the event, and sort of thank you very much, and we'll now sort of throw it open to our students and to our colleagues and students, if they'd like to ask any questions. So